Hi, folks. My name is Eamon, and I work at Grafana Labs as a senior principal field engineer. This is my first time at the Monktoberfest. It is, as a natural follow-on to that, it's also my first time speaking at the Monktoberfest because you couldn't go the other way around. And clearly, I'm the first post Steve's welcome presentation, so I almost feel like I'm getting not so subtly hazed in the process. But we'll see how we go. I'm very excited to be here and to share this talk with you. I had the idea for this for some time, ever since a particular event occurred, which we'll get to. And I jotted down some notes in case I ever found a conference that was suitable to the type of talks that I had noted down. And of course, extremely late to the game, I learned that this conference existed earlier this year, and I went, this is the one. So I sent it in, and I talked to Steve about this on the boat last night, and he literally said if it was a talk that fit anywhere else, then it shouldn't be here. This is the place for ones that don't fit. So perfect. So what's the talk about? My talk is called Top of the Morning to You, saying goodbye to a company you loved because you had to, not because you wanted to. So as you can probably guess, I'm focusing on a past job here, and likely a feeling that many of you have had at some point in the past. We've all had jobs that we really liked that we left less than voluntarily, and this kind of focuses on that. So a bit of history. Back in late 2016, I joined Pivotal Software. You might have heard of them. They were all about extreme programming and test-driven development and pair programming and all those fun kind of agile things. They made a lot of cool software as well. They made Concourse CI. They made, they were the primary OSS contributor to Cloud Foundry. They also had an enterprise version of Cloud Foundry. They made Greenplum, Pivotal Tracker, Gemfire, all these great things. And there were also consultancies around modernizing your applications and also implementing things like Cloud Foundry. And that last bit is the team I was actually on, though it doesn't really matter for the purposes of what we're talking about here. These are some old pictures of the offices I was able to find through the Wayback Machine because the website's not in the same form anymore. You can see that it's kind of like a typical tech startup in appearance, but there's some nuances here too. So one of the things that the office always did was there was always a full hot breakfast spread every morning, which is nice. You're like, oh, that's a cool perk. And I later learned that one of the subtle reasons for that is it encourages people to be in there on time because they don't want to miss the breakfast. Because that stuff wouldn't just be left out. That would be cleared away very shortly after the time that most people started work. So it was a subtle incentive. There was a lot of adherence to agile processes in the office. So physical stand-ups, retros, all those fun kind of ceremonies. Most engineers actually paired on their programming tasks almost all of the time. So if you ever paired on a problem with somebody, you might be like, oh, that was kind of fun, and we solved the problem pretty quick, but imagine doing that for 6+ hours a day. And I don't mean this in two different computers and you just kind of walk over and you talk about the problem. All of the machines were actually, it was one machine, 2 monitors, 2 keyboards, 2 mice. So you could not do things at the same time. It was impossible. And most of the engineers worked that way. And it worked really well. It was extremely draining, but it did function really well in terms of the actual output that it generated. You would also rotate who you were pairing with every week for the most part. And what this did was it had the added bonus of achieving really high context among the team because everyone kept sharing their knowledge around all of the time. And sometimes they would do things like cross-team pairings. They'd borrow someone from another team and have them pair with you. And initially you might think that would slow people down, and I guess in a way it did, but it brought the average speed up so much higher. So it worked really well. Ping pong was the popular game for breaks, and I later learned that that was also subtly nudging you to an activity that also involved pairing. So it was all kind of pleasant, but a little bit I guess, maybe subtle and like insidious at times when you learned all these things were like sneaky ways of making sure people still collaborated all the time. So this might make you ask if, I was in a cult. Interesting. I can't really fault anybody for saying that, but that's obviously a sensationalized opinion. No one would ever like write an article about that or say it so directly. It did make sense in many ways, though. So the original consultative group was Pivotal Labs, and that was around the application modernization side of things. They were transforming how people wrote apps and transforming their processes. So having all these ceremonies and things helps to do that and to show people a newer, more modern way of working. And this then bled into Pivotal's own internal engineering teams once Pivotal Labs became Pivotal and started working on Cloud Foundry and like all these things. So the internal engineering team saw that this worked really well and adopted all the same processes because it just did work well. That was the whole reason it was being done. But all of that wasn't really what made Pivotal what it was. Do the right thing, do what works, and be kind. This was the set of company values, or motto, or mantra, or whatever you want to call it. Everything stemmed from this. And let me tell you, people really took this to heart. So the people that worked at Pivotal were some of the most kind and empathetic people that I've ever worked with, across the board. And it wasn't just like software engineers. You're talking software engineers, documentation writers, IT and finance and HR, and everybody operated with these three things in mind all the time. I don't know how we did such a great job of selecting for this in hiring, but we did. Incidentally, on hiring specifically, engineers and many other roles, they actually had to do a 1-hour pairing exercise. And if you were interviewing for something that wasn't technical, it was okay, because it wasn't really about the technical task. What it was you being scored on your ability to work cooperatively. And so being able to dialogue about a problem and take correction, and if you were a jerk who always had to be right, you weren't going to pass this particular interview. So this weeded out a lot of people. The other thing that engineers specifically had to do was an entire day of pairing on software problems to see if the other team members found them good to work with. And I think these parts of hiring did really contribute a lot to the kinds of people that did get hired. It wasn't perfect, but it helped a lot. I know. We actually used to have this as like a sticker you could get for your laptop as well. There was like a version of this with like Pivotal logos on the Care Bear snow ice. So this is a personal story from back then. So back when I first started at the Pivotal office in San Francisco, I came in and got some breakfast and sat down at one of the long tables that were there. I picked an end that was like empty because I didn't know anybody, and I wasn't quite feeling up to just interjecting at a table full of strangers just yet. And so I just sat down by myself. Within seconds, I had somebody else coming over looking for somewhere to sit who just zeroed right in on me and asked if he could sit there. And I was like, sure. He asked if I was new or if I was visiting from another office or something like that. And I said it was my first day. And they jumped into like a super warm, welcoming mode and told me everything they could possibly think to tell me about the office and working there. Took me on their own personal tour around the 2 giant floors of this like warehouse building office that we were in. And now I just met this person. They were not part of my onboarding in any way. They were just a stranger I met at breakfast. And I wasn't scheduled to actually meet anybody till a little later in the day. But here this person was giving me all this care and attention. And a tour. After it concluded, I eventually had access to like some internal systems and I knew their name. So I said, oh, I'll look up what that person even does, because all they did was tell me their name. And I type it in, and they're a VP. And I was like, what? So a VP who was completely unrelated to my org and job function took a bunch of time out of their morning to take me around the office and introduce me to a whole bunch of people just because they saw that I was new and I just started that day. They didn't have to do that or need to do that, but they chose to do that. And that was like really impactful for me for a first day. I was confused and surprised, and obviously pleasantly surprised, and probably didn't quite believe that that was anything more than, wow, that guy was really friendly. But no, this was by no means a freak occurrence. This was exactly the kind of thing that was completely normal at Pivotal. People were just really, really kind. Some other smaller examples: a random question to a developer if you walked up to one of their teams might result in them walking with you because they don't have the right answer, but they will go walk and talk to another team. So you kind of walk to the next group, two of you together, and then you walk to the next group and the next group, and you've kind of created a bit of a Pied Piper system around the office because you all want to know the answer and you all want to help find the answer. But you do get there in the end. You might do an impromptu whiteboarding session to get there, but you'll find the answer. I regularly observed newer people always being made sure to be listened to in meetings. So new people can often get passed by because everyone already has a really high context over what's happening. This never happened at Pivotal. They were always made sure to include them and make sure everybody was up and understanding what was going on. You might get invited to the optional 1-minute plank in the office that happens close to lunchtime, which is literally a whole circle of people just at this big spot in the office floor, all doing a plank at the same time and trying to see if they could go a whole minute, which was a ridiculous activity, but it was silly and it was fun and you could make fun of yourself, and it was a good way to meet people that you wouldn't chat to otherwise in different functions around the office. There was also a Slack channel for splitting avocados, which I thought was a bit strange because who doesn't just eat their avocado? But apparently people like eating half avocados and then not knowing what to do with the other half. You could also play ping pong with literally anyone because it was such a popular game to play in the office. Though personally I found everybody was way too good at it for me. Amusingly, I searched for an image using the term tech worker ping pong, and this was the third result. And what's really funny is this is from the Pivotal San Francisco office. So, lucky me. We also did have these big nets as well to catch the balls. That's how serious that we actually were about it. Otherwise, they were flying all over the office onto people's desks. And you could always speak up at the whole floor stand-up that happened every morning, complete with everybody actually standing, as you can see in the picture, and an amazingly synchronized single clap at the end. So all the stand-ups would actually conclude with whoever was running it going, okay, that's stand-up, and then one clap, but everybody was dead on that clap, and which was a bit scary the first few times. Not a cult. All this was really enveloping. Pretty soon you found yourself chatting to strangers in the office and asking them the same questions you were asked, offering to show people around if you had some spare time to do that, just because you knew it was the nice thing to do. Of course, nobody was more inviting and welcoming than the office happiness team. And I know that sounds really dystopian of a team name to have, but really it was just a better version and far more accurate name for the workplace operations team that oversaw the office events, the front desk, and kept the place decorated for different things that were happening throughout the year, and tons of other tasks. You could walk into any Pivotal office and get the absolute warmest welcome you ever got. It was always lovely to visit one that I'd never been to, and to be pleasantly unsurprised that people were equally lovely in this other place that I'd never been before. I popped into some of them in cities I was in that I was not there even for work reasons, just to see what they were like, and everybody was just so nice every time. So these attitudes and behaviors, they naturally bled into the work. A lot of our work outside of the internal engineering teams was consultative. So in person with customers, both in our offices and out at theirs sometimes, and we loved getting them into all the fun things, especially when they were at ours and we could really immerse them in it. You'd introduce them to the same working values, and they'd start out thinking that all these ceremonies and things that you're doing are totally silly. But they would all come around in the end, and they would see how it helped us to do our jobs and to work better. Again, totally not a cult. A former Pivotal colleague, this is the wordiest slide in the whole deck, I swear. A former Pivotal colleague, Nat Bennett, wrote an article about Pivotal, and I just wanted to include this paragraph because I think it helps get this across. If you weren't there, the best way I can describe it is it was a little bit like being a Starfleet officer. You're on a mission of peace and exploration. Your coworkers all share your values. You're kind and cooperative, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it works. You get shit done all the time. You're proud of the work you do, and you understand that in the past, and in other cultures, people still didn't believe in things like money and war, but you know you've found a better way. And that way lets you run circles around the folks who are still stuck on zero-sum competition. This captures it really well, I think, although I have the tainted perspective of, well, I know it captures it well because I was there, but hopefully this helps it come across a bit more to those of you that weren't. But I can't just gush about the place for 30 minutes, because that's not the point of the talk. It's not what the title I gave it anyway. I give you this context because I want to try to communicate to you, if I can, how special this place was and why I'm still upset that it's gone years later. So in April of 2018, Pivotal went public. And no, I didn't get rich from it. I joined too late for any of that. The stock went up and it went down. It didn't do great overall. It kind of mostly came back to where it was, actually a bit lower. No. And in August of 2019, it was announced that VMware was going to acquire Pivotal. This was a bit strange because Pivotal had actually been originally spun out of VMware around 2013, 2014, one of those. But I guess they suddenly decided they cared about applications and not just infrastructure after all, and just said, oh, you guys can come back in here. The acquisition closed just before the end of 2019. It wasn't totally clean. There was a lawsuit, accusations of shady dealings, and people putting fingers on scales who had too much power and were influencing things happening in the background. But ultimately, it didn't stop the acquisition from going through. There was a settlement recently before this went to court full on, but still, ultimately, it didn't matter to the regular employees. The damage was already done here. Now, I, in particular, was in the position of knowing exactly what was going to happen, because I had actually come to Pivotal from VMware after working there for about 8 years. I had seen VMware acquire many companies, and I saw how it went every time. The usual acquisition playbook. They'll come out and say, oh, the culture won't change. The culture of your company is so important. There are like 60 heads shaking right now, which is great. The culture is so important. In particular, they harped on it harder for Pivotal because of its like quite unique culture, and said, oh, that's completely like the most important thing that we're trying to preserve here. But of course, this was a lie. Unless you let a company operate as a totally independent entity, the culture is almost certainly going to be destroyed in favor of the one from the acquiring company. Also, in the playbook is saying that layoffs won't happen. Yeah. With any acquisition, there's going to be duplicate functions. And so layoffs are most likely going to at least happen there. If you're lucky, that's the only place that it happens. But sometimes they happen in lots of other places for good measure. And the last couple of years has probably been the most layoffs we've seen in forever. So we all know how that goes. On a town hall that happened before the acquisition closed, someone from Pivotal, who had been chatting to folks they knew who already worked at VMware, asked about VMware's policy of annual layoffs that happened at the beginning of the year. And I don't remember who from VMware responded, but they had the gall to say that VMware doesn't do annual layoffs, which was just a straight lie, because I remembered every January for 8 years at VMware, going and hearing on the whispers of the wind that, oh, today's the day. It's layoff day, where they axe about 5% of the company. And, you just stop working, because why would you do any work if you're maybe going to get fired that day? And this was every year for 8 years. It was harder for them to do in countries with stricter labor laws, of course, but broadly, it still did happen every year. And I don't know, I just thought of like the absolute audacity of just saying we don't do annual layoffs. And it was probably some weasel-worded thing where it's like, oh, those aren't layoffs, those are reductions in force. And it's like, that's the same thing, though. Now, does this mean VMware was an awful place to work? No, not at all. It was my first career job, and I had no major issues there. It was corporate, but it was fine. Fine enough to stay 8 years at least, obviously, for me. But again, it was corporate. And corporations are known to be pretty rigid and following their processes. So I knew what was coming. I knew that everything that I loved about Pivotal was going to be destroyed sooner or later. So I told my VP, who was a 10-year alum of VMware, that I wasn't going to stay. He understood, but he encouraged me to wait a bit at least and just see how some stuff shook out. He was maybe just trying not to have a bunch of people leave at once, but he was just like, just wait like a little bit. So I did wait a little bit. And then I watched VMware lay off that whole happiness team I talked about earlier. So all of the workplace operations team, the people I said were the most welcoming people and made the atmosphere of every office exactly what it was, they're like, nope, out the door. And why? Because of corporate rigidity, because VMware's policy of how they ran their offices is all those people were contractors for another company. And they're like, well, no, we have to apply policy to everything, despite what we said before. They could apply to be those contractors, though. Great consolation. So VMware laid this team off without a thought after saying they wanted to preserve Pivotal's unique culture, not understanding that the very same team were some of the strongest shepherds and stewards of that exact culture. There was protest, and there was an open letter that made the news with hundreds of signatures from folks at Pivotal, including me. But ultimately, it didn't change what happened. But it was a nice gesture. Is there enough writing on the wall yet? It was for me. So I started applying to roles elsewhere. I landed one at Grafana and announced that I was leaving. I was out. I left in March of 2020, and yeah, good thing nothing else world-changing was happening at that time, huh? Great time to change jobs. I warned close colleagues of everything that was going to come to pass, but almost all of them stayed for various reasons. Some of them, it was pandemic uncertainty. They didn't want to leave a job when they had a job, fair, or just blind hope that things wouldn't actually change that much, or just wanting to ride it out as long as possible for their own personal reasons. On the boat last night, I was told the amazing phrase, some people just want to stay on the carousel until it stops completely, which I think is very accurate here. As the months went on, I heard that everything I had predicted had been correct. And slowly but surely, everything that made Pivotal was erased. I didn't take any pleasure in being right, though. So no happiness team. They got rid of the breakfast in the morning. Lots of the offices were closed because VMware's office policy was mainly that they weren't right in the big major cities. They were often in like a satellite city or like a suburb because it was cheaper and they could have a bigger space. And the offices that weren't closed, they remodeled them all to look really boring and corporate, as you might expect. There were reorgs. Technical manager roles were replaced with non-technical manager roles, which seemed unnecessary because these people were in the roles already, even if you don't think managers need to be technical, so that was strange. I could go on, but I'll spare you all of that. You can ask me later if you want. So I had now watched both myself and many friends go through the 5 stages of grief firsthand. And so we'd hit denial, and they'd be like, this can't be happening. Pivotal wouldn't sell out. We just went public. Anger, I absolutely hate this. Why is this happening? Bargaining, lying to yourself of maybe it won't be so bad, even though you knew it was going to. Depression, you're just moping. You're like, this is terrible. Everything was fine, and now it's awful. And acceptance. You go, well, it's dead, and it's time to go and move on. For me, all these stages happened much faster because I had the foresight of having worked there before, so I knew everything was going to happen, so I just rapid fired through all these. But I watched all the friends I knew at the company go through them in slow motion, which wasn't enjoyable. And, not really an activity you ever really want to be going through. So people were scattered to the wind. Many left to different companies. Some went to some of the big ones that you know. Some went to really, really small ones. Some people left tech entirely, which was interesting. Many people, though, tried to join companies that were as pivotally as possible. So they either had a large number of people who'd left Pivotal working there, or they were former customers of Pivotal who had adopted the practices and tried to keep them up. From what I could see on the alumni Slack, there was a lot of people just looking to find something similar. There was an article I found in the past that I could not find again to quote it directly, so I'm paraphrasing, but they phrased it as all of the ex-Pivotal people trying to chase the high of working at a place that good again. And I don't think they're wrong. That was a really great way of describing it. The former CEO of Pivotal, he started a new company called Mechanical Orchard, doing some of the same consultative work, but it's much smaller, and it doesn't do all of the same things. There are some folks are there from Pivotal as well, and I hope they're doing really well. I haven't talked to them lately. So what about Grafana? This is my commercial pitch. No, I'm just kidding. I've been here 4.5 years, and so it must be better, right? Why am I so sad and angry that I wrote a whole talk about the company that I actually spent the least number of years working for in my career? Well, Grafana is different. I wouldn't say it's better or worse. It's just different. There are so many different things that it's hard to compare them. For one, the company is fully remote and was fully remote before the pandemic. And so the dynamic is totally upended from how things were at Pivotal. There isn't this same collaborative in-office nature. You can only do so much things with remote tools, as everybody knows by now. And so it just wasn't the same dynamic that you could compare to. We have a lot of great times when we get together, which is also enhanced by the fact that we very rarely do. So you have the whole absence thing, and then when we get together, we all have a great time, because we're not usually together. The values are different. The culture is different. Not bad, again, just different. And people are still kind, of course, but again, in different ways. I also lived through hypergrowth at Grafana, and I saw us more than 10x our employee count since I joined. And so I'm basically a fixture on the wall at this point, or an old man in Grafana terms. And that's just so different to joining a company like Pivotal that was already at like 2,000 employees when I joined it. I love working at Grafana, but I also loved working at Pivotal too. They're not mutually exclusive, and I can still be upset about what happened at Pivotal, even if I did thankfully land on my feet at Grafana. If Pivotal hadn't been acquired, there's a good chance I'd still be there today. Obviously, I don't know everything and I can't predict the whole scenario, but a pretty good chance, since I was happy there and I had no reason to look elsewhere. And I think that's what makes the difference. I left VMware originally because I wanted to, but I didn't want to leave Pivotal. I had to. It was a dead end. And so I think I'll always be both angry and sad about that. And that's okay, I guess. I don't really have a choice. So you live. And sure, I could try to go to one of the places that have more ex-pivots, but I liken that to revisiting your hometown or going back to an online community or a game that you left a long time ago, or going back to a neighborhood or city that you used to live in, it's never the same. You can't recapture the same magic. You can't go home again. So I encourage you that if you ever find yourself in a similar position where you really love the company or team that you're on, that you try to recognize it at the time and treasure it, because like all things, it ends eventually. I have the great fortune of being on a team that I love right now at Grafana, and I'm really trying to remember to savor it as much as I can. My director tells me you only get a few of those in your career, at best. So honestly, I'm fortunately batting pretty high on average, it seems. But that doesn't make it any less special. Speaking of things that end eventually, some of you might be aware that in an ironic turn of events, Broadcom then came around and acquired VMware. And let me tell you, talk about a taste of their own medicine. Because Broadcom absolutely gutted VMware. This is only one headline. They've done several rounds of these layoffs. Thousands and thousands of people. It was almost poetic. And the schadenfreude should be delicious. But honestly, it's not. I still knew a lot of people that were there, both from Pivotal and from before I worked at Pivotal. And they all had their lives upended because of this. And none of this brings Pivotal back. So really, it doesn't make me feel any better, other than to make jokes about it, like just now. And so I'll just hold those 3-ish years fondly in my own memories. Memories of a great company and great culture and great people that just wanted to do the right thing, do what works, and be kind. Thanks for listening to my eulogy.